Hi, my name is Samuel Goulet, and welcome to the Simple Gospel Study. Really excited to partner with you on your journey. The Simple Gospel Study is about the story of Jesus, and it's an amazing story. I love Jesus, and I really look forward to talking with you and teaching you about his story seen in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that's actually where we'll start today, because the portraits of Jesus, the perspectives of Jesus, they're different from each one of these authors. And the way they represent Jesus is significant for us to understand because, well, we're all different people. So while we're looking at the way they represented or their portrait of Jesus and how it was unique to them, we're going to understand that we have our perspectives of God and our perspectives of Jesus that, quite frankly, are always changing and hopefully growing. Our unique perspective of God is tied to our personality type, our history, and we really want to go through a journey continually of studying God. That's theology. It's the study of God and studying him so that we can see him more accurately and see him for who he really truly is in a very real and sincere way to us. So we can avoid the pitfalls that come from seeing him in an errant way or seeing him in a way that isn't true. Some people have some perspectives of God that are tied to their perspective of, say, their father or leaders and coaches or teachers or pastors. And it's important that we see God accurately, detached from any image of man. So as we look into this, we see that Matthew's portrait of Jesus really was written in a way to present Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. So he wrote it with an audience in mind that was Jewish. And he, being a former tax collector, he brought in his perspective and his history, which was really, really important for us to understand that he was presenting Jesus as somebody who was fulfilling Old Testament prophecy, and really he was presenting Jesus as somebody who was fulfilling the full narrative shift that God had intended for mankind. And you see the story of God and man from the time of creation, Adam and Eve, and the fall. And some of the things you see there with God continually trying to make covenant with man, and man continually doing its own thing, for lack of a better phrase, and wanting to live by its own name and its own image. And so we see that Jesus is this really pivotal, culminating moment where he had a victory in such a way that allowed us as people and God to have a greater relationship. That grace in Jesus' life created an access point to God that was unique. And it recovered something that was intended with the original creation of Adam and Eve. So when Matthew presents Jesus, he's presenting somebody who was fulfilling the law and was fulfilling all of these prophecies that spoke of a Savior, of a Redeemer. And that's beautiful to see Jesus in that way, as somebody who repaired a broken narrative from man to God. And that's amazing. And then you see Mark in the way he presented, or the portrait he created of Jesus, and it emphasizes Jesus as the Christ and the Son of God. And you see this in Mark 1:1. It says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And you see this incredible thing, and it was written with a Roman audience in mind. And Mark was actually the secretary or scribe of Peter. And so you see a different perspective than Matthew, the tax collector, or Luke, the physician, or John, who was a former business owner and fisherman. And you see Mark has this perspective that he introduces to a Roman audience, which had a familiarity with Jesus, but it created a real bridge there that's amazing. And if you think about the perspective that could relate to us, is you see us as an audience of there's people, maybe even you're one of those people that is familiar with the idea of Jesus, but has yet to cross that bridge of really being in relationship and making Jesus your Lord and Savior. And so you can see this familiarity to this relational devotion shift that is introduced and is a portrait that you see here that I'd encourage you to go on, is to go from being familiar with the ideas of Jesus to being in real, significant relationship with Jesus, because that's his intention with you. And then when you see Luke, you see somebody who is a physician, and he tells us an accurate historical account. And this is a really interesting take or perspective, because it's allowing us to really see somebody who examined closely what this account was. And you can see in Luke 1:3, it says, "With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decide to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus." So he examined carefully. Something that I think is misinterpreted or misunderstood about faith is that it's one that lacks intelligence or intellect. But really, Jesus presents incredible deductive reasoning and incredible thought to people like Nicodemus, where he describes being born again. And some of these times where you'll see him craft language that's incredibly intellectual and incredibly smart language. And so your faith, as you see this portrait of Jesus, does not require you to turn your brain off, but in fact, there's a phrase in the Bible, the mind of Christ. The thoughts, the ideas, the paradigms. Even Romans 12:2 talks about being transformed by the renewal of your mind. So your faith walk with Jesus does not require you to turn your mind off. In fact, Jesus will speak to and transform your mind, and that's powerful. And then John represents Jesus to a world and to the world. And that's incredible, because Jesus isn't only relevant to those who have heard of him, or to those who have a history of prophecy as it relates to Jesus, but Jesus is also incredibly relevant and incredibly impactful to somebody who is entirely lost, not saved, not walking with God, doesn't care about him at all, and can encounter the love of God, which is a huge theme in John and a big portrait that John presents. Because when you, I don't know if you're like me, but you walk around people of all kinds, and everyone, including myself, we are looking to encounter true and meaningful love. And this acceptance desire, this desire to be embraced, this desire to be championed, it's in all mankind. And we all have our different languages of love. But truly, John gives a portrait of Jesus that is incredibly impactful to the world at large, especially those that don't have a history or a relationship with Jesus. And so my encouragement to you is to see Jesus accurately. A.W. Tozer brought up this quote and had this quote that talks about how important it is to see Jesus accurately. And what he said is, "The idolatrous heart assumes that God is other than he is, and substitutes for the true God one made after its own likeness. And always this God will conform to the image of the one who created it, and it will be base or pure, cruel or kind, according to the moral state of the mind from which it emerges." Now that's a deep and an intense phrase and passage there from A.W. Tozer, but it's one that introduces that when you don't see God accurately, it's a false image of who God is. And if you're engaging your journey and transformation in that false image, then you're really not progressing the way God's intended you to progress, and your worship can even be a little errant. So my encouragement for you today is, do you see God accurately? Do you see him accurately in your life? Do you see yourself accurately in relationship with Jesus? And to study, to pray, to ask for advice and wisdom, to see Jesus accurately, so that in addition to that, you might present Jesus accurately to others, the same way the four Gospels did. A beautiful, diverse portrait representation of Jesus. My encouragement to you today is to engage in a really accurate understanding and knowing of Jesus for yourself, and presenting that to others in an intentional, true way.